Good afternoon. Governor Cooper proclaimed July 3rd, 2022 as National Crown Day. July 3rd commemorates the inaugural signing of Crown, Creating a Respectful Open World for Natural Hair Act, which prohibits employment and educational opportunities discrimination based on a person's hair texture or hairstyle if that texture or style is commonly associated with a particular race or national origin. Today, our guest speakers will be the co-creators of the Crown Coalition, initiators of the official fight against hair discrimination. They will share their role in the initiative and experiences that amplify why the Crown Act is needed. Before we go further into today's program, I would like to do some housekeeping. As always, keep your microphones on mute throughout the entire session. Please send all of your questions, if we have the opportunity for questions today, to the chat room. And the chat room will be monitored, and we will work to make sure all of your questions are answered in an orderly fashion. Again, that's if we have the opportunity for questions today. This session will be recorded, and you will be able to view this program later on demand. Speaking of on-demand recordings, you will be notified soon of this program's availability and all of our recent programs when they are ready to be viewed. We are pleased to announce the following upcoming programs: July 19th, ADA Anniversary Observance, August the 30th, Women's Equality Day. We look forward to seeing you at both of these programs. Now, I'm going to take the opportunity to go over with you the proclamation that Governor Cooper had for National Crown Day. And it is as follows. Whereas the Crown Act, Creating a Respectful Open World for Natural Hair, is proposed law that prohibits race-based hair discrimination, including the denial of employment and educational opportunities because of their hair texture or protective hairstyles. And whereas as of 2022, 16 states have passed a version of the Crown Act. Legislation has been passed by the United States House of Representatives, and the bill now sits with the United States Senate. And whereas the Crown Act was devised to protect the human rights of Black women, men, and children to wear their natural hair with pride and without fear of discrimination, by raising awareness of this issue in the workplace and schools across the country. And whereas discriminating hair policies can cause undue disruptions and stress in the lives of individuals and households, impacting society as a whole and the broader economy. And whereas the Crown Act would extend statutory protection to hair texture and protective styles such as braids, locks, twists, knots, and head wraps in the workplace and in public schools to ensure protection against discrimination based on all race-based hairstyles. And whereas this legislation seeks to increase participation in programs and activities and encourage inclusive language aimed at ending discrimination due to specific hairstyles. And whereas the state of North Carolina, through its Office of State Human Resources, has already taken steps to implement inclusive hiring policies across state government that seek to eliminate discrimination on the basis of race-based hairstyles. And whereas the state of North Carolina encourages legislators to work together to protect the rights of Black men, women, and children to wear their hair natural with pride and end all forms of discrimination in the workplace and beyond. Now, therefore, I, Roy Cooper, Governor of the state of North Carolina, do hereby proclaim July 3rd, 2022 as National Crown Day in North Carolina and commend its observance to all citizens. I've just read the proclamation for National Crown, for Crown Day. And now I'm going to go into the introduction of our speakers that we're going to have today. And they are the co-creators of the Crown Coalition. Our first introduction is going to be of Ajoa B. Asamoah. She's founder and CEO of ABA Consultant. and it's a racial equality. She is a racial equality champion, social impact strategist, political operative, and policy architect. She developed a legislative strategy and leads the Crown Act movement on behalf of the Crown Coalition. In addition to having spearheaded the legislative victory to codify the nation's first office on African American affairs, she is a former adjunct professor and served as the Biden-Harris campaign's national advisor for Black engagement, and as Black engagement director of the 59th Presidential Inaugural Committee. Adjoa has hosted events for cultural institutions like BET and served as a radio co-host on Sirius XM. She is an advisor to local, state, and federal officials, a subject matter expert appointee to numerous commissions, committees, advisory boards, and think tanks for entities including Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, the DC Commission on African American Affairs, the NAACP, and more. She has been appointed to the State Title I Committee of Practitioners and elected chair for 6 consecutive years. Adjoa holds degrees in African American Studies, Psychology, Educational Psychology, and Applied Behavior Analysis. She studied abroad at the University of Ghana and is a doctoral candidate in educational leadership at the George Washington University. Our next speaker is Orlina Blanchard, co-owner of the Joy Collective. She is a leader behind the social impact movements and marketing programs for some of the world's biggest brands. She is an award-winning cultural marketing strategist with over 27 years of experience building value for Fortune 500 companies and startups. As Joy's president and COO, she has led marketing insights and strategy for a diverse portfolio of clients, including the U.S. Naval Academy, Dove, OWN, Shea Moisture, Google Fiber, and more. Before Joy, she served as executive director of the Black Media Matters Consortium and former head of digital media for TV One, and worked for brands including Anderson Consultant, Accenture, American Express, and Corporate Executive Board, and more. Orlina serves on the board of advisors of Beauty United as an executive board member of Digital Pioneers Academy, and previously served on the board of the Mid-Atlantic chapter of the National Association of Multi-Ethnicity in Cable, and as board president of the Washington, D.C. chapter of Women in Cable and Telecommunications. She is a 2020 recipient of the Purdue Outstanding Industrial Engineer Award and a recipient of the National Black Caucus of State Legislators 2021 Nation Builder Award. Orlina holds a BS in Industrial Engineering from Purdue, an MBA from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, and has roots in Nigeria, the UK, the United States, and Canada. She is also a fiercely proud wife and mother of 3 sons. Essie Eggleston Bracey, president of Unilever USA, CEO, Personal Care, North America. She is a transformational beauty leader with decades of executive experience in the CPT and beauty industries. She is president of Unilever's U.S. business and oversees Unilever's personal care portfolio in North America, which includes iconic brands such as Dove, Degree, and Axe, among others. She's previously served as executive vice president and COO of the beauty and personal care business in North America. A believer that business can be a force for good, Essie leading efforts to make Unilever the company that has the greatest impact on people, communities, and the planet. These efforts include Dove's founding of the Crown Coalition, the Crown Act, and as champion for Shea Moisture's work with the New Voices Fund for women of color entrepreneurs. Earlier in her career, Essie led CoverGirl's work to diversify the face of beauty with disruptive real beauty talent, such as Queen Latifah, Ellen, Pink, and Janelle Monáe. Outside of work, she co-founded Cause We Care to help build communities in communities safe in the face of COVID-19 pandemic. Essie has been married to her husband, Des, for 17 years and has 2 children, Anura, 16, and Benoit, age 12. Kelly Richardson Lawson. Kelly is a business leader with over 30 years of experience and founder and CEO of the Joy Collective, an agency that delivers work for brands like Dove, Shea Moisture, BET, ESPN, OWN, Macy's, the U.S. Naval Academy, and more. She led the Ad Council's COVID-19 vaccine education campaign for the Black community, and in 2020 founded the Sunrise Project, a nonprofit that helps parents of children who struggle with mental wellness and addiction. The Oprah Winfrey Network of podcasts collaborated with her to create the Sunrise Project podcast series to amplify the impact of this initiative nationwide. Kelly has also created the first full marketing organization at BET and led elements of the biggest tentpole events in the country, including the BET Awards, Celebration of Gospel, Hip Hop Awards, Spring Bling, and BET Honors, and created BET's Emmy Award-winning HIV/AIDS program, Wrap It Up, and the BET Foundation, a 501c3 focused on obesity and other health-related issues in the Black community. She has a lengthy list of awards, including BET's first ever Emmy Award, NCAA Image Awards, Telly Awards, and many more. A native of Shaker Heights, Ohio, and an unwavering Cleveland Browns fan, she is a graduate of Howard University and an active member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. She and her family reside in Bethesda, Maryland. I've introduced all of our members of the panel today that will be coming forth to give their reflection on the Crown movement. And I'm going to start with Ms. Asamoah. So if you can unmute your microphone and begin, we will start with you. And welcome to everyone on the panel. Thank you.
Well, first, let me just say thank you for having us, albeit virtually. It is always great to be in community with.
We can barely hear you.
Uh-oh. Technology is not always our friend, but we will work it out. So let me see if I can do something on my end. I'm not sure I have the volume all the way up. Can you hear me clearly? Yes or no? Can you hear me clearly? Yes. Okay. So I was just noting that first, let me just say thank you so much for having us here. I need to acknowledge Senator Murdoch first for her leadership on this front in the great state of North Carolina, in addition to the governor for just signing the proclamation and deeming something called a Crown Day. It is worth noting that back in 2019, I called Senator Murdoch, who in normal spaces I call my little sister, and I call her Nat, because we are sorority sisters and she's a mentee of mine. And we were hosting a congressional briefing all the way in the nation's capital, on Capitol Hill. And she literally drove from North Carolina to the nation's capital, which really just speaks volumes to her commitment to really leveraging where she sits to just really affect change. Now, we were asked to talk about our role in creating this movement, and you see 3 of us here. One of our co-creators is not feeling well and a little bit under the weather, and so I bring regrets on her end for not being able to be here. But in terms of the movement itself, my mother was born and raised in North Carolina, and I would spend summers there. So today is really a full circle moment as we talk about this work and again, our specific roles. Now, the Crown Act, as you all may know, is a critically important piece of legislation, and it is a movement to outlaw race-based hair discrimination, which is a very prevalent yet less discussed form of racial discrimination, at least prior to the creation of such a movement. Now, as you probably heard, I was a little bit late trying to log in, but as you probably heard in whatever long, boring version of my bio, I wear quite a few hats, or dare I say crowns. But for framing purposes, as it specifically relates to today's session, I am proud to be the all things racial equity champion who decided that changing the law made the most sense. I met these women at Essence Festival back in 2018, and we're just now coming back from celebrating National Crown Day. And they were already talking about addressing the issue of hair discrimination. It is not new at all. They already had a plan in place, but I met them and decided to go to a brunch that they were hosting. And me being who and what I am, said, it sounds like you have a great plan. They were talking about tackling artificial intelligence and search engine bias, because if you looked up, if you were to do an internet search of beautiful women, you would not really see pictures that look like us. And so I then shared, being someone who works at the intersection of both policy and politics, I think we should change the law instead. And so here we have something now as a result of conceptualizing that idea of how we were going to actually tackle racial discrimination in the form of hair discrimination. It is something that is now being discussed all over the world. So as my standard disclaimer, because I wear a couple of hats, I must note that I am speaking not on behalf of any politician or official versus as someone whose life's work has really been focused on fighting anti-Blackness and advancing racial equity across spaces before it was cool to do so. So I've already given sort of the historical context in terms of when I met these women and how we came together to form what I affectionately call the Core Four to address this issue, but let's really talk about the issue itself. Racial discrimination in the form of hair discrimination is much more prevalent than many people, especially those, I should say, who have not been on the receiving end of this type of discrimination may think. And it's been legal in the absence of explicitly outlawing it. Now, in many ways, anti-Blackness is pervasive. And while race is certainly a social construct, racism is very real. And it really requires a thoughtful and intentional approach to dismantle it, to dismantle both the rules and the practices that really reinforce it. Hair discrimination, as we'll all often call it for short, with a reminder that we're talking about race-based hair discrimination, has historical roots dating back to the 18th century. My father was born under the vicious system of colonization in what would become the Republic of Ghana. And he is a retired history and political science professor who taught me to really be proud of my heritage. And I share that because I learned about the African aesthetic as a child. And I was taught that in many of our traditional societies, our hair served as many things, including complex language systems, if you will, and told you so much about somebody's identity. The dehumanizing process of enslaved people who were Africans, including many things that you know or at least should know about, and those who enslaved them among our mere existence itself, sort of disrespected our crowns. And so again, just in terms of setting the historical stage, bringing that into this century, hair discrimination includes being fired and passed over for promotions. And it's been the reason that far too many of our children have either missed school or had negative educational experiences. Now, we already know that gender pay gaps are real. Now, add on to that the racial piece, which impacts our upward mobility, not just of the individuals, but of the families that are impacted. And again, it's been the reason that far too many of our children have had these negative educational experiences. So as I think about the work I've done, not as a lobbyist, because I am not one, and sometimes we use them in this movement, but really as an activist and a strategist and an avid fighter for progress at the local, state, and federal levels, I think about those children who were sent home in tears because they had braids that were deemed a violation of school rules. I think about a student who I testified alongside of in Texas, who was told that he could not participate in his graduation ceremony because he rocked his locks, which, given his own ethnic identity, was really a display of ethnic pride. And I also think about a student, wrestler, who was really forced to make a decision that no child should ever have to make. And that was to choose between having his locks cut and his identity attacked, or forfeiting a match that he had actually earned the right to participate in. And I even think about the Cook twins in Massachusetts, who were repeatedly disciplined for being themselves and rocking their beautiful crowns. So you see women here who have decided that that was not something that we will stand up for. And we understand the implications in both the workplace and in the school settings, and why we need to really ensure that we are extending statutory protection to our hair, because in the absence of this, with the exception of in the District of Columbia, where it was already explicitly outlawed, the Crown Act amends the existing definition of race to include those traits that are historically associated with it. Now, I should pause here and acknowledge that while I am a policy architect and strategist and wear many, many hats, I am not an attorney. So I developed both the social impact and the legislative strategy for this movement, and I've led it on behalf of the Crown Coalition, I should note. But there is a dynamic team of lawyers who we worked with who developed the legal strategy, and they should be lifted as well. So I will pause here just to note that is sort of my framing, and my fellow co-creators will weigh in. But our dear colleague, Orlina Blanchard, really wanted to be here today. But again, she's a little bit under the weather, and she asked me to share briefly on her behalf. So aside from being our brilliant co-founder, she is a marketing genius. And I choose my words carefully, and I say genius intentionally. Trained as an engineer and Wharton MBA, she really sees how parts fit into a whole. And she challenges me, and I think all of us, to think about narrative. She is my proud West African sister. She is a Nigerian woman who was raised on the continent, and she spent time in Europe as well prior to coming to the States to build not only an impressive academic resume, but an unmatched career. A master storyteller, which I say as a fellow West African is at least partially cultural, because we really pride ourselves on our ability to orally pass down information. She developed the marketing strategy for the movement in coordination with her agency co-owner, Kelly, who is here, and we'll talk more about that. It is really interesting to me how lived experiences informed what it is we think and subsequently do. And because she has lived on multiple continents, her perspective is invaluable. Because as I've shared, we all know that anti-Blackness is a global issue. She has firsthand experience witnessing how beauty standards vary and why the African aesthetic that I mentioned is critically important to lift. And for a social impact movement like this, you'll hear us both talk about how we're committed to not only changing policy, but also really shifting the culture. And she is undoubtedly a verified culture keeper on many fronts. And she is someone whose name I want you all to know, because she is so focused on the work that she's not always out in front. Now, because history and accuracy are important to me, I often remind people that the Crown Act is not the only thing I've done for the culture. And it is instead part of a larger body of work for me to move Black people, African people forward. And really, my commitment to advancing racial equity did not start or stop with the Crown Act. However, I often acknowledge, and publicly, because that's important to do, to tell the truth in public forums and to not accept or take credit for work you didn't do. Fewer people know about the other work I've done. The fact that so many people internationally know about the Crown Act is really a testament to, and is largely because of the marketing and comm strategy that she led the development of, again, with Kelly over at Joy Collective. If you think you know about many laws, I should say, think about how many laws you know about. And then I want you to pause and I want you to think about how you've seen the Crown Act everywhere. It should be obvious why her contribution to this movement is truly invaluable. Now, I know Orlina, and she is far too humble, in my opinion, and would not want me to go on and on about her. So in the spirit of honoring who she is authentically, I will pause here and certainly stick around for any questions you may have about my work or her work in terms of our contribution to the Core 4 and moving this legislation forward.
Thank you so much. We are going to move to AC Eggleston Bracey.
Hello. Thank you so much for inviting us to talk about this important movement. You asked us to talk about a number of things, and thank you, Ajwa, so beautifully expressed as always. And we're really here talking to you today because of what Ajwa has made possible in making this a legislative agenda. You know, my background and story is a little bit different than what Ajwa shared. I am a business executive. I've been in corporate America over 30 years now. Born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, I'm actually a child of activists. You know, my father, James Eggleston, integrated his college, University of Illinois, after the death of Martin Luther King Jr. and brought the first Black students there. And my mother is a race discrimination attorney. She still is today, living in Chicago. I was a math and science major and studied engineering and decided that the numbers and the engineering weren't for me. And I went into the business community. And what I joined in business was businesses that represent beauty brands over the years. You heard in my bio that I had the opportunity to lead the CoverGirl business and makeup business. I did that for probably about a decade. And now I work for a company called Unilever that has a range of brands. I have about 24 brands that represent beauty, including Dove. I joined Unilever in 2018. And as a longtime beauty advocate, why am I a longtime beauty advocate? I believe beauty really matters. It is so much, it is more than skin deep. Beauty is often at the source of our confidence. And in this journey around discrimination, it is used against us. As Sister Ajwa talked about, our crowns were wrapped so that we could not take pride in our beauty and all that we beheld as beauty in Africa, and constantly used against us, where young people, even today, because of the centuries of hatred, have defined our Black beauty as ugly, not beautiful. And that has been used to oppress us and keep us from being all that we can be. So Dove is one of my brands in my portfolio, but in CoverGirl, I could see how the beauty images of blonde hair, blue eyes were being perpetuated in society. And we had a role, I had a role and could play a role in changing the face of that, and brought in talent like Queen Latifah to help shift that rhetoric. So coming to Dove, Dove's life work as a brand, the Dove brand, you know, the body washes and the bar soap that you use, has been called campaigning for real beauty. That is moving away from the blonde hair, blue eyes, stick figure, narrow Eurocentric gold standard of beauty, and trying to shift that. And while it's been championing for real beauty for a couple of decades now, we hadn't, I believe, gone far enough for Black women. And so coming into the business, the one thing I wanted to do was have Dove put its money where its mouth is, not just talk about beauty inclusivity, but really be about it and do something for Black women. And so as a part of that, I brought in an agency called Joy Collective to help us with Dove figure out how we could serve Black women better. And the Joy Collective, you have the two co-owners here today. Well, actually, one can't be, Orlina, which Ajwa spoke beautifully about, but Kelly, who will speak later for Joy Collective, came in and worked with us to figure out where it was important to make a difference and an impact. And we went along and talked to Black women about what was most important to us. And we heard consistently there were two areas where our beauty is discriminated against. One is actually in, I would say, colorism or overall beauty not being appreciated in the market or in the world, really. And then the other was in hair discrimination, and all the stories that Ajwa talked about. You know, I'm over 50, but many of us, 50 and older and younger, have scars from our hair being called kinky, nappy, just not viewed as beautiful. And so we set out at Essence, as Ajwa said, to engage a group of Black women, dynamic Black women. We call them the Dove Black Beauty Alliance, to engage on where do we go from here with the help of Joy Collective. And we coincidentally met Ajwa, and it was a beautiful moment at Essence. It was the reception for the mayor at the time, the new mayor at the time. And Ajwa said, "Sisters, I can help you. I can help you with your mission on behalf of Dove to help the Black community to shift the beauty narrative." And she joined our breakfast. And coming out of that in a series of connections, she identified the opportunity that you can do so much more with legislation. And sisters, I will help you drive this legislation change. And she highlighted what forums to go to, where to talk about. And so what we did on behalf of Dove is shed light on the issue. Few people realize how prevalent racial discrimination is through hair discrimination. People just don't know. They still don't know. So our mission on behalf of Dove was to do a couple of things: drive awareness of this issue and movement. So we've done that by putting advertising around it. We've done that by having a petition, driving people to the petition. We've done that by driving in influencers who can tell the story. People like Tabitha Brown. These are people we fund and pay. We've done that by enabling through the Crown Coalition and paying for lawyers to help with the legal strategy. What Ajwa talked about was just beautifully right on, and why the Crown Act has had traction, where lots of people have been working in this area, and we stand on the shoulder of these giants before us, is the strategy legally around making hair protected from prior civil rights legislation. And again, the lawyers can speak better. I'm speaking more anecdotally around that the Crown Act is, protected out of FEHA, and all of this work that Ajwa has led with the governor and the senator, and helping see why this is important. The role that the business community has played through Dove is funding the effort to drive awareness, funding the agency to do the grassroots work so people know this is an issue. And that has supported and helped us today with all of the legislative work from the amazing legislative officials who bring the bills forward, and the strategy from Ajwa to get to nearly 17 states that have some version of the Crown Act, where the first was passed in California, July 3rd of 2019, and why we celebrate Crown Day. We drive consumer engagement around it. We call it Consumer It's People, to do filters around My Crown is Beautiful. We have Crown Awards. We just go on a journey to help drive awareness. And, while we celebrate that we have the Crown Act, we are painfully aware that the 23 million African Americans who are now protected because of it, we have just as many Americans who are not protected because we don't have federal legislation passed, because we don't have legislation in all states. And so this group of women, all of us, are just scratching the surface of what the whole community needs to do to get the Crown Act passed. And why we're here talking to you today is really our commitment to help everyone have these rights. So I hope I hit the points. Oh, there's a piece that I wanted to talk about. The last bit is it's personal for all of us, and it's personal for me. Coming into corporate America, I wore a perm and I wore a bob, and all I wanted to do was conform and fit in, which was very different than when I was a young person. When I was 5, 6, 7, 8, I wore braids, I wore afro. I got all dressed up on my 3rd grade picture day. I'm my Afro proud. My name is AC Johari, which is AC is commonly used in Ghana. Johari is Swahili for jewel, which is to wear who you are, your African heritage, proud. And I did that until I was about 11 or 12 years old, when society told me it was not okay. And I straightened my hair. I got it pressed. I wore the perm, and I went into corporate America conforming. And when I realized I was conforming, I didn't even know it. I was just doing what we thought was appropriate, what was professional. And when I had an aha moment and I learned that I was conforming, 6 weeks later, I did my big chop. I cut off my perm and I wore a 1/4 inch afro. And I wore that for 5 years until I went into twist, and I've worn every single kind of natural hairstyle that you can imagine. And when I cut off that fro, man, it's like I breathed, I exhaled, I got a pep to my AC step, I became more of myself. And by the way, you know what? My career started taking off at that point. Got a whole new reconfidence in my own skin. And in that, to learn all those stories Ajwa talked about, that people did not have the right to do that. Young people turned away from school. Wrestlers denied the ability to compete. It was just not okay. So all of this is very personal to me, and I will not stop. We will not stop until we get this legislation passed nationally, because our hair is our freedom. Our crown is who we are, and it deserves to be respected. Crown creating a respectful and open world for natural hair, and deserves all of us, all of our gifts and talents and abilities. There's so much of that to bring this effort to make sure all of us in the next generation have the freedom and don't have to undergo the nonsense that we have today in society. So with that, I conclude and I pass it over, I believe, to the co-founder of Joy, Kelly Richardson Lawson.
Thank you, AC, and what an honor to be here with all of you. Special thank you to Senator Murdoch for having us. I'm so delighted to be here. I will wrap up all of these, or AC's commentary and Ajwa's commentary, by saying that it has been an incredible journey since 2018, when AC first called and said, hey, I just started in this new role on Dove and over all of these personal care brands, would love to bring in a Black agency. You know, we don't have many Black agencies, if any, at that time, and would love to see if you'd be interested to work with us. And so Orlina and I quickly said, yes, we would love an opportunity to do this work with you, to really engage Black women, which is such a sweet spot of ours as a Black and women-owned agency. And so we started this journey in May of 2018, when we came into the fold as one of Dove's agencies. And as AC mentioned, and as Ajwa mentioned, the whole story and the whole narrative at that time was really looking at the fact that Black women are often marginalized in the world and often invisibilized, quite honestly, and ignored and disregarded, especially in the world of beauty. And so the first thing we actually did, even before Essence, was we created a beautiful piece of creative where we shifted the lens, flipped the lens around, and allowed Black women, 12 Black women specifically, to explore and share what beauty looks like from our lens. It was the first time that the brand actually flipped the lens and allowed us as Black women to speak. And the opening question was, how does it feel to know that I'm beautiful and know society does not deem me so? And you have this beautiful montage piece of creative, a 2-minute anthem where 12 beautiful Black women share what beauty looks like in their perspective. It's often not physical, it's emotional, it's spiritual, it's their daughters, it's their mothers. And that spot, that piece of creative, which was our celebration of Black women, we produced that in just a couple of weeks, and we actually launched that spot at Essence Fest that Friday morning at the breakfast that you heard about. And that first piece of creative is one of the core pieces of this initiative. We wanted to make sure that throughout the past 4 years, we were highlighting and supporting and celebrating Black women via creative as one of our strategic pillars, authentic, organic, creative with Black women front and center. We also wanted to make sure that we were going into the community consistently, almost every week. We've done over 90 events, grassroots events in the community. That is super important, where we're actually reaching out and touching people and speaking directly with people. And so that strategic partnerships, working with community organizations, reaching out and supporting people at the local level has been a second really strategic pillar that our agency team has been focused on since 2018. And I just want to make a note to say that Ajwa has been critical in that as well, because several relationships Ajwa brought to the table. starting way back in the beginning, whether it was with the president of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, of which she and I are both members, or the president of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, or the Lakes, or you name it. Several organizations Ajwa is either a member of or very connected to or an integral part of. She brought those relationships to the table, which thank you for that. And we have built relationships and partnerships with many of those organizations. So back to this whole how did we get started? It started with the insight about Black women being marginalized and creating a narrative around that to say we are beautiful and our beauty looks like this and it should be celebrated. And then secondarily, doing local events. Well, one of the first ones was Essence Fest. Unilever's first time being at Essence in a big way was that July of 2018. And that's where we have hosted a breakfast. AC hosted a signature kickoff breakfast, and we invited movers and shakers and influencers and people to work with us with this Dove Black Beauty Alliance, of which many people were in the room, all focused on changing the narrative. And at that time, as Ajwa mentioned, and as AC mentioned, we decided to partner with Ajwa as our lead legislative strategist to help us with the legislative movement, which is a huge pillar, one of the strategic pillars of this whole movement. So you have authentic creative, you have going into the community, whether it's strategic partnerships, virtual events, in-person events, with whatever, what have you. And then trusted messengers and ambassadors has been a critical component of this as well, this movement. So that's another area we work on, whether it's relationships with organization leads or local ambassadors or DJs or people like the Tabitha Browns of the world who actually posted organically back in 2019. We didn't pay her for that. One of our team members sent her a DM and she actually posted a 3-minute video about Donna and the Crown Act completely organically. So that's the type of movement we have built based on the creative, the in-market activation, the grassroots, the ambassadors, the community partnerships, and of course, the legislation, which is one of the rocks, if not the rock, of this entire movement. And so that's been my role. It's really been around putting the squad together, putting the team together, creating activations and opportunities in the market to actually touch people and to actually show that we want their help, because this is not possible without our village of Black women who have been working in this space for many, many years, who are doing the work in their communities, whether it's with their local organizations or even on their own, or whether it's legislators like yourselves that are really carrying the torch in your state. It takes a village, it takes all of us, and that has been my role, putting the squad together, putting the team together, and then, going out and speaking to people quite often. So I will end it there. But I can't speak enough about the importance, I just will say, of the village, the sisterhood, and that everybody has a role to play in this movement.
And Wendy, if I may, I know I'm going off script a little bit. I would be remiss. I certainly do know the difference between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And in my other world, I am always going to defer to those who are elected officials, but I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge Regina, who reached out to us on behalf of the North Carolina Office of State Human Resources. So I certainly wanted to just jump in really quickly and acknowledge that while, yes, Senator Murdoch is certainly the one who has been championing the cause and joined us for our congressional briefing, certainly want to just give the proper respect to the executive branch and particularly shout out Regina. So I just wanted to chime in and acknowledge that as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ajwa. And we sing Gina's praises here all the time as well. So it's something that happens all the time because she's just awesome in getting our programs and programming together. So thank you for that. And Kelly, thank you as well for your insight on the Crown Act. And on that note, I'm going to turn the program over to Toella Pliakas, where she's going to give reflections on the Crown Act.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to all of our attendees for joining us. For the state of North Carolina's Crown Day observance. As was just mentioned, my name is Tuella Pliakis, and I'm so honored to be sharing this space with you all, especially our panelists. I have to say that it is so inspiring to see a group of powerful Black women working to put together legislation that is so impactful to so many people. So as we begin to close out this program, I'll be offering some reflections on this event and the importance of this issue. I want to start off by addressing the elephant in the room. Many people think hair discrimination does not matter. From the fight for our democracy playing out before our eyes with the January 6th committee hearings, to the Supreme Court's choices to question human rights our country has recognized for decades, there are a lot of urgent issues our country faces that may leave one to wonder, why are we talking about hair right now? Republican Congressman Jim Jordan asked this question when the Crown Act came to the House floor this spring. He claimed this bill was a distraction by Democrats to avoid answering to the issues the American people care about. Congressman Al Green of Texas countered by saying, Black people are American people too. When you say that American people don't want it, you cannot exclude Black people. So Congressman Green, in my opinion, was touching on an important point. Black Americans and other Americans of marginalized identities have long known that hair is not trivial. My journey advocating against race-based hair discrimination began when I was in elementary school. When I was in 5th grade, I had a teacher who frequently interrupted class to scold me for coming to school with the hair that grew on my head. She chastised me for disturbing the kids behind me with my big hair, relentless in her efforts to shame me into changing my hair. My mom was forced to take time out of her busy day to come down to my school and explain to my teacher that I literally could not control the way my hair grew, and she definitely would not be the one to straighten my hair to appease the school. Everything, especially forms of self-expression, are situated within a racial and political context. Choosing to ignore the socio-political framework through which we view hair allows our biases to go unchecked. And for too long that has happened, often with incredibly severe consequences. For example, a 2019 survey conducted by Dove found that Black women are 1.5 times more likely to be sent home from the workplace because of our hairstyles. Our hair is 3.4 times more likely to be perceived as unprofessional, and Black women whose hair was natural or braided were consistently rated as less ready for job performance. These biases threaten the financial stability of many Black people who reported being passed up for promotions or even fired because of their hair. In addition to the effects that hair discrimination has on adults, students as young as 6 years old have reported being disciplined for wearing their hair in styles natural to Black people. This year, a high school senior in Texas named Travion Gray was not allowed to attend graduation and was suspended for weeks for refusing to cut his locks. An 11-year-old Black girl in Louisiana was expelled for wearing her hair in braids to school. I could sit here all day and tell you stories like these because the list goes on and on. And these are just some examples of the discrimination that Black youth face as a result of their hair. And this discrimination has massive impacts on life outcomes. Research conducted by my colleagues at the Initiative on Gender Justice and Opportunity at Georgetown Law Center found that compared with white girls, Black girls are over 4 times more likely to receive out-of-school suspensions and just about 4 times more likely to run the risk of being expelled from school. Black students, especially girls, often face higher rates of exclusionary school discipline as a result of discretionary policies like dress codes, many of which perpetuate race-based hair discrimination. Educational disruptions of this nature are associated with many negative outcomes later down the road, like lower educational attainment and increased interactions with the juvenile justice system. But stereotyping Black hair is not new. The politicization and projection onto Black hair has been around since our nation's founding. Black hair was part of the false logic that underpinned racial hierarchies in the American South during the time of slavery. Slave owners used language about Black hair as a tool of dehumanization, referring to it as wool in an effort to liken Black people to animals. In the antebellum era, Black women in Louisiana were required by law to cover their hair so as not to tempt white men, illuminating both the fragility of the racial hierarchy and the sexual impropriety associated with Black hair that persists today. Then, with the Civil Rights era and the Black is Beautiful movement, many came to view natural Black hair as an expression of political radicalism. While the way the stereotypes present themselves may change depending on the historical context, the principle remains the same. We see that hair has long been a site where projections about Blackness can land. Crown Day and the Crown movement more broadly are an important step in acknowledging the importance of hair acceptance and the necessity of the fight against race-based hair discrimination. We are so lucky to have leaders in this fight. We have the founders of the Crown Coalition, who you've heard from today. We also have creatives like Matthew Cherry, whose Oscar-winning animated short film Hair Love about celebrating Black hair and the joys of Black fatherhood I cannot recommend highly enough. You can find it on YouTube or in a follow-up email that will be sent after this event. I also want to applaud Senator Murdoch, Governor Cooper, and the state of North Carolina for taking this massive step to address hair discrimination and encourage the residents of North Carolina to celebrate the diversity of hair this beautiful state has to offer. As we close out today's event, I encourage each participant here to consider what you can do in your personal life to affirm that the self-expression of Black youth and Black people more broadly is not just accepted, but celebrated. Thank you.
You didn't tell the people where you went to school. You
So-
forgot that part.
We actually both happen to be New Haven natives. We went to high school together at Hopkins, but many years difference.
We went to Hopkins.
Yes.
It's so good to see you, sis.
You too.
You know, that's what happens when sisters get together. So I apologize for going off script, but I'm looking at it, I'm like, so she's just not gonna state the obvious and say I'm a Hopkins grad and I am a journalist with the Washington Post and Georgetown. You're not gonna lift yourself. I'm gonna lift Black women. So I'll do it for you if you won't do it for yourself. So go ahead, sis. Do your thing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Beautifully, beautifully done, Toella. Just so well expressed. And I'm sorry, Ajua gave me the feeling to go off script. Just beautifully done. And I just love Black women and what you expressed. So well done. And I would just add, you know, I loved your call to action and what you can do. A very simple thing you can do is go to thecrownact.com, thecrownact.com, or if easier to remember, dove.com/crown. You can sign the petition, right? Sign the petition. We're talking about North Carolina. You can also write your local and state legislative official to help advocate for the federal passing as well by going to thecrownact.com. So beautiful.
Yes, I would also agree. And at this point, I'm going to open up the floor for questions. And before we start with the questions, we already have some coming in, but I wanted to pass along this comment that we received from one of our attendees today. And they just say to all of you, wow, you all have accomplished a lot in a relatively short amount of time compared to other legislative endeavors. Congratulations and much continued success. So thank you for that. And I'm going to start with our first question. I've seen the Dove commercial, and when I first saw them with the Black women in all colors, shapes, and sizes, I only wish that my grandmother had lived long enough to see something like that on TV. She died in 1979 and never saw herself or her peers represented as beautiful on TV. And so they just wanted to give that reflection to all of you. And then Toella, thank you. And we love your comments that you made today. And thank you for passing the crown on. And when was the first time, and this is for each one of you, when was the first time you felt that others didn't see your beauty the way that they see the standard of beauty that you spoke about today? And that question is for all of you.
For me, I think it's most acute when you're in predominantly white environments, but it's not limited to that. And so for me, it was school. You know, when I had the safeness of home, our parents hold us up. And again, you know, Ajwa talks about this. She talks about, I shake my hair with my braids and my beads clanking. And I'm just shaking my head. Yes, like, yes. You know, it was a ritual and we felt so beautiful. And then you go out into the white environment and people are like, what? That's not appropriate here. So very early, and it's consistent with our data. Toella talked about this. Dove has sponsored 2 research studies that Joy collective as the agency has executed. And it shows mothers of those who have experienced hair-based racial discrimination. 53% say it starts as early as 5. And then I believe it's over 80% by the time they are 10 or 11 years old. And Kelly or Ajwa can check me on those facts. But for me, it was when I was young. It was probably 6, 7, or 8 when I was leaving the home, and I'd wear my braids with my beads, and people would look at me a little crazy, and I would wonder what was wrong.
I'll just chime in to note, I completely know that this issue is, again, very prevalent, but I was raised by Pan-Africans. And so from a very young age, I was told I was beautiful. I was told I had royal DNA. And so I actually don't recall a time when I felt like I wasn't beautiful. Now, I recognize that not everybody's father is a Kwame Nkrumah scholar and mom, again, out of North Carolina as an activist. I recognize that not everybody had that growing up, but I actually don't have personal lived experience, at least that I am aware of, where I was told or felt like I wasn't beautiful. And again, I attribute that completely to my upbringing and walking through the world as if I belonged, and just given that sense of racial and ethnic pride that was ingrained in me so young. So I actually don't have an instance where I can remember feeling it that way. But again, in full recognition that I know that it exists, and that's why I'm working collectively to ensure that we are tackling it.
Yeah, my situation was different. I had, similar to AC, I had big natural hair, and it was always my, edges would not lay down ever. And so it was always, a little extra. And so I had little people, why your hair is so frizzy? Why is, then I had people on the bus pulling my ponytail and, all kinds of stuff in junior high school and even 5th grade. I remember very explicitly, I won't say their names, 2 women. And then my situation, my parents were raised in the Deep South in Alabama and in Arkansas. And of course, their parents trained them that straight hair, they would go to the hairdresser and get their hair pressed out. And we had, we had a similar experience where my mom would do my hair on Sundays, lay me back in the bowl, straighten it out. And I remember explicitly going to Randall Park Mall. I'm from Cleveland. I grew up in Cleveland, and the guy named Ron did my hair, and he blew it out, and he flat ironed and curled it and did all of that. And I had this straight hair for the first time, really straight hair for the first time. I think it was also my first relaxer. And I got home, and my dad, not knowing any better, he's an amazing man, but he said, wow, went on and on about how beautiful my hair was. And that was an indication that what I had before, which is my natural big wild hair, was not beautiful. And even my mom's in her 70s, and even to this day, when I wear my hair natural now, she'll say, when are you going to see Shirley? When are you going to see? That's how she was raised, and that's that generation. And so I felt loved and cherished and special, and so much love in my home with my parents. And yet at 12 years old, that comment from my dad, wow, your hair's so beautiful, when it was laid flat straight to my head, was a note to self, which started the next 40 years of my life of wearing my hair straight every Tuesday morning, being at the hairdresser to get my blowout from Shirley 25 years or so ago. And even in college, and even right after school when I worked corporate America for the first time. And it wasn't until 2019 when I started wearing my hair natural again. And then these twists are brand new from the weekend. Essence Fest, just did this for the first time in my life. But I wear normally now natural hair, that I'm so proud and feel so free to be in that space. It wasn't until 2019, because for the 30 years prior to that, it was 40 years prior to that, I'm in my mid-50s, was bone straight. And that's what I was taught.
And I think that's why we talked about the business and the marketing aspect of this, the marketing. What we need to do is normalize our natural hair as beautiful, because it's deep in the conscious of cognitive, built in not deliberate, but this automatic default of this this Eurocentric standard of beauty. You know, despite my mother and father both wearing afros, both give my brother and I African names, society tells you something different, which is,
Right.
you know, a part of Kelly's story. But
Right. And it's generational. Then that spot that you talk about that you wish your grandmother had seen, there's a young lady, she was 17 at the time. She said, I remember seeing my mom, seeing my grandma straightening their hair to get a job to look presentable, because that's what our parents were taught in many cases. And so that, like you said, it gets ingrained into us. And then we think we show up at these big corporations and we need to walk in a certain way. And it's not until now, really, in many parts because of this movement, that there's freedom to walk in really proudly. However, we have our hair, braids, locks, twists, knots, or natural, and all of it, and to feel proud to be that way, which is such a wonderful blessing to have had a role in this movement and to have that freedom now. Just awesome.
You know, I think it's so interesting what you said about how you first felt like most beautiful when you had gotten that affirmation about straightening your hair, because I had a sort of similar reaction when I first started straightening my hair in like maybe middle school. I remember saying to people, and I would say this for years, I felt most beautiful when I straightened my hair, but felt most myself when my hair was big and natural. And
Yes.
eventually someone said to me, one of my friends, shouldn't you feel most beautiful when you feel like yourself? And that sort of started a process of discernment for me about what spaces am I putting myself in? Who am I trying to like appeal to in this way? That type of thing. So I don't know. I think that I completely agree that it's definitely a lot about like creating that space, carving out that space for yourself, and also carving out that space for others so they feel confident to express themselves in that way.
That's right.
And
And then
that's what
having,
this is.
oh, go
We're
ahead,
not
Ashley.
telling anybody how to wear their hair. So I wear my hair straight sometimes also, and I wear it curly and I'll wear it in twists, and we will rock it how we see fit. We're fighting to ensure that we are protecting and preserving people's right to show up authentically, however, whatever that looks like for them. So this is not a movement to force anybody to, get locks or twists. It's not a movement to dismiss other types of style. We are fully embracing the versatility of our hair. And again, protecting and preserving our right to rock our crowns however we want to do so, with a specific interest on ensuring that we have the statutory protection to rock it naturally and or in protective styles, which we, again, identify as locks, braids, twists, bantu knots, etc.
Mhm. I just want to add one quick note. AC mentioned some stats earlier. And so just for people who are on, we have a resources page on the crownact.com website. And in the resources drop down, there are two studies. There's a 2019 Crown Research Study in the workplace, among Black women in the workplace. And then there's the 2021 Crown Research Study for girls, where we looked at discrimination, as AC alluded to, among Black girls, against Black girls, and that study is there. It's downloadable. There's some very rich data that really shows how it starts early. 53% of mothers say it starts as early as 5. 86% of Black teens who say they've experienced discrimination, say it started as early as 12, and it lasts a lifetime. That's 86%, but there's multiple data stats in that study. And so I urge you to take a look at that. It's really powerful, wonderful, powerful study that we also did on behalf of the Dove brand.
Thank you for those comments. Before we go into some more questions, I just wanted to reflect on some of the things, the comments that were made, especially by AC, because it's just, I have noticed the shift in the way that a lot of the products that we use, you see the inclusiveness now. Before, it was really hard to find products for natural hair. Now you can go to the grocery store and get natural hair products. You don't have to go to a beauty supply place to get these products or order them online. And you can find them in Walmart. You can find them in Target, where you didn't see that before. And I know when I was growing up, I saw the shift go from the afros to then little girls were told we had to get a just for me. You know, you had to get a relaxer. And you saw the girls with their ponytails, with their hair being relaxed, where I saw my parents with afros. And so it was a big change and a big shift. And so now to see that all the products that we have out there, you know, it includes, you know, you just having the flexibility to show I can wear my hair straight. Like Audra said, you can wear your hair straight. You can wear it in locks. You can wear it in faux locks. There's so many different ways that we can express ourselves through our hair. And we're allowed to now be able to do that in a professional setting as well. So I would just like to say to AC, for Unilever to do that and to start to see all of those products out there now over the years, just thank you for that. And I'm getting a lot of just reflections that are coming from people that are tuning in today. And one thing that I see is that someone said that you are all beautiful, and they're actually in tears. I have someone that said they shared a story about how they had a manager tell them to go home from work because they had their hair in big braids. And this manager told this employee that they looked foolish, and they were so embarrassed because they thought they looked beautiful before they, you know, came into work. And, you know, they felt really good about how their hair looked. And then the colleagues that were at work, they laughed at the comments that the manager made about her braids looking foolish. And so, you know, she went home, and now she feels very proud and validated. So she wanted to say thank you to Governor Cooper for his efforts. And I don't think people realize how hurtful it is to know that people dislike you for something that you have little control with over without destroying your natural hair. And what they would advise to people is to have conversation about natural hair and these natural hairstyles, because there are a lot of people that don't know and don't understand, you know, the origins of hair discrimination. But once they understand that, they're a lot more understanding of, you know, why, you know, we're just authentically wearing our hair the way that it grows out of our head or in protective style. So again, this just opened the Crown Act, just opens up the door for those conversations. And so
And
I would just like to say,
you know, sister, you're not alone. That is a part of this movement. So many times the way discrimination and oppression works is they separate us to make us feel like we're alone in that issue. And what you just shared, the story about the humiliation you experienced that was unacceptable, that was race discrimination. Hair discrimination is racial discrimination, is a shared experience of thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people. So what we try to do is share those stories so that you see that you're not alone. And then we try to address the cognitive part by normalizing. It is professional. You see us in natural settings, and we ask all of you, do you know, we don't prescribe how to wear your hair, but just to edge a little bit past that discomfort, if you're so inclined, because it's the power in numbers that will help normalize it. So thank you for sharing your story. And the Crown Act, that legislation, will also be the big pivot to normalize it.
and I have here as well, someone wanted to say to you, Toella, they're sorry about your experience, and they feel that you are beautiful and they love your hair. And they just wanted to say to your mom, because she said those insightful comments to you, just bless your mom for that. And they wanted to know, what do Black students around you say or feel about Crown?
That's a really good question. And thank you for your comments. That's very, very kind. And I do have to shout out my mom whenever I tell that story because in some ways I'm so grateful to my mom for having been an advocate for me for so long, but in another way, it speaks to the full-time job that it is to be an advocate for a Black child specifically. There's just so much that comes at your kid in the school system, and I'm really grateful that she took the time to do things like that. But a lot of people don't have those opportunities, so drawing attention to those disparities is also important. But yeah, I that's a really good question. I haven't spoken about the Crown Act specifically with the youth that I work with, but I definitely know that there are a lot of issues related to these like discretionary school policies. A lot of young people are over disciplined and criminalized in their schools for issues related to like dress codes, as I mentioned earlier, and dress codes that have specific enforcement or specific policies that target girls of color, like hair, like how short a skirt can be. I mean, that is going to be different depending on how a body like moves through the world. Things like that definitely still impact girls, and it's sad because we've been having these conversations for so long. And there's definitely a lot of movement that has been made in these spaces, but it is sort of sad to hear that these are still issues that girls face in schools.
And another question I have for you, for everyone, is what do you see next for the Crown Act?
I will start, and because I have to hop for 2:15, and again, just thank you all for having us. It's been a true pleasure and honor. Our goal is to extend the statutory protection to everyone here in the confines of this country, but also thinking about it globally, because we've been contacted by people in other countries who also know that this issue is a global issue. So the goal is to really ensure that every single person in this country is afforded the opportunity to have legal protection. Again, what the Crown Act does is it does not define race, because again, we know that's a social construct, but it is an existing protected class. And so we are ensuring that on a federal level, race-based hair discrimination will be outlawed. So the goal is to extend statutory protection to every single person. We will not stop until that happens. And essentially that is the next step for the Crown Act, is to continue, but we're not just focusing on federal. We are focusing on local, we are focusing on statewide, and we are focusing on federal, because we know that that is the way to address this issue, is to not just focus on one, but to do this at the local, state, and federal levels. So I want to thank you all. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you. I unfortunately have to hop again here in my personal capacity, but now I need to go back to wearing my other official hat. So thank you again for the opportunity, and have a great day. We look forward to engaging with you all beyond that.
I think Ajua said it well. I would just add in terms of the federal legislation, the process to doing that. This is the second time that we've passed in the House. The outstanding job to be done, one of the most challenging ones to get the federal legislation and the statutory protection, as Ajua says, is getting it passed in the Senate. And that hasn't happened yet. Obviously, there's a lot going on in our country right now in terms of rights. So making sure it's on the agenda and it gets passed, because the last time it was introduced in the House, it did not pass in the Senate. So that's very important. And while we are going for federal legislation, we do think it's important to go, even when I will declare we have success federally, we want to pursue each and every state. Because there's additional protection that's reinforced there. We know it's important at the state level, so we want to continue in the states where we don't have the anti-hair discrimination legislation or versions of the Crown Acts. And we will continue to celebrate each and every year Crown Day. It's our National Independence Day, is how we think about it, with the mixed feelings we have around July 4th. And Ajua's point on international, we've had conversations with stakeholders in both Brazil, a very large Black community that's quite oppressed in Brazil, and also in the UK. So Dove has been convening influencers and the equivalent of legislators and the like to identify how to pursue Crown Acts for, global protection, if you will. So that's in process and will be a journey.
I'm going to wish all of you well in that journey to take the Crown Act on to all across the globe. And at this point, we are going to conclude this program. But before we do, I would like to thank each and every one of you for coming in today and speaking, all of the members of the panel today. We are just very grateful to have each and every one of you here. And on behalf of the Office of State Human Resources, again, we would just like to say thank you. Thank you for coming and giving us more information on the Crown Act and Crown Day. And we would just like to keep you encouraged in your endeavors in getting the Crown Act enacted on a federal level. And at the Office of State Human Resources, we are going to work to make sure that hair discrimination is a part of what is included in our policies, as we stated in the proclamation. And that's something that we're going to work hard to make sure is enforced. And on that note, we would just like to, again, thank you all for attending this program. It will be available on demand, and you should see a note from me early next week to show its availability and all of our recent programs. And again, thank you, our panel for coming and speaking about Crown Day. And I would like for all of you to enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Have a good day.
Thank you.